morning. You're watching Bio 109's field trip to the Pima Native Plant Nursery. And we're here with the nursery manager, Andrew Hatch, and our two film people, Angie and Jill. This is a special nursery. It grows about 230 different native plants. It's not a commercial nursery. You can't go here and buy plants because these are grown for Pima County projects, revegetation projects, and so on.
That's right. We grow around 230 species, but that number is always increasing, and I always like to try to grow new fun things. And at any given time, we have about 20,000 plants in this 2.5 acres. And most of those are going to go out to roadsides, so when they make a new road or widen an existing road, all those plants that end up on the side have to come from somewhere. And our mission is to try to make those plants native, because in the past they've used a lot of things from California, a lot of things from Australia, and we want to put natives back so that it's more natural environment and less of that artificial stuff we've been using for so long.
So one advantage to growing native plants, besides maintaining an authentic landscape, is that these are plants that are adapted to this region. And so they often do better than, say, a plant from Australia or somewhere like that. Now, among the things that Pima County Nursery does is they grow or take in salvaged plants. So these are plants like Saguaros that are in the path of development, and either the county or the Arizona Cactus and Succulent Society come in, take those plants out, bring them here so that they can strengthen themselves, and then be returned to an environment, a region that needs restoration. Now, when we talk about restoration and revegetation, it means two different things. Restoration means, let's see if we can get an ecosystem back to exactly what it was. And this is often impossible because sometimes plant communities are destroyed before anyone knows exactly what's in them. So it's hard to restore something when you don't know what you had in the first place. And sometimes it's difficult or impossible because the plants that were previously there were mature plants that are very difficult to transplant. So if you think about transplanting a blue Palo Verde with a 40-foot crown, you're probably not going to succeed. So what the county focuses on is revegetation. In other words, they pick plants suitable to a given area that are native, put them in there, give them the best chance they can of getting established, and then the plants are on their own. So it creates a plant community that's perhaps similar to the one that was lost, but not identical.
Our salvage program is primarily cactus, so when they are going to expand a road or they have a new development going somewhere, we go out to those sites and we'll dig up pretty much every cactus in the disturbed area that's small enough to be moved, because cactus is really easy to transplant. It's kind of self-contained and self-sealed, and you can pop it out of the ground without any major repercussions. We try to do a lot of other things like small trees, small shrubs, with varying success. Some things like to be moved and some don't, and that's just kind of you have to trial by error, see what works and what doesn't.
Today what we're going to do is first walk through some of the grow houses, which are protected environments for young plants or recently transplanted ones. Then we'll walk out into what I'm calling the yard behind us, where there are plants out in the open. And then the last thing we're going to do is cross into Prickly Park, which is a revegetated site that is mostly planted with cactus. It's not intended to attempt to recreate the previous environment, but we'll talk about that some more when we get there. So right now we're in the cactus and succulent house, and this is where a lot of cacti are grown from seed. So I've got a little tiny baby here. This is a baby mammillaria about the size of my fingertip, and it'll be allowed to grow for a little bit more until it gets nice and big before it's sent out to be transplanted. Most of these hoop houses have a certain amount of experimentation going on because a lot of these plants haven't been grown before. So exactly what they want, what they need, is sometimes totally unknown. Some plants have to have their seed coats scarred before they can germinate. Some plants need to experience a period of cold like winter before they can germinate. Other plants look for other kinds of signals. So with all that unknown, it's a challenge to figure out how to grow these plants reliably in quantity for revegetation. Another reason why one should grow plants from seed is that you're going to grow a more diverse array of plants than if you're growing from cuttings, which would produce a series of clones. So this is a way to boost or maintain genetic diversity by growing these plants from seed.
Also, because we are a government nursery, we get to grow things that are federally endangered. For example, this is our Pima pineapple cactus, and it is kind of our signature endangered species in this county and in most of southern Arizona. So you will find this in a few sandy, flat areas down south of Tucson on some of the reservations, but otherwise you'll be hard-pressed to find it anywhere. This cactus recently bloomed and now has a fruit growing on top. It's pretty hard to see. But that's exciting because we can then take those seeds and continue to grow it, which almost no one is allowed to do that except for government nurseries like ours. So I don't know if this cactus will ever end up back in the wild, but hopefully its progeny will. And this is just one of the endangered species we get to grow, but it's a very pretty, nice one. So this is our greenhouse on the facility, and almost all of our plants are started by seed in this room. It's a protected environment, so it has higher humidity, and we also have coolers to keep it cooler. It does freeze in the winter in here, so it's not totally protected, and we do have a lot of variation. Everything is done from seed to maintain genetic diversity, and that's an example of something like this. This is a little mesquite tree that's probably about a month old. They're grown in these little tubes because it's a lot faster to transplant. They have ridges on the inside, so roots do not circle, and it's kind of a nursery standard to do things in little tubes like this. The one problem with a tube like this is you can't apply bottom heat, so if it's a seed that does need bottom heat, you have to do it in a flat-bottomed little square pot. And once everything's done in here and it's big enough to go on to the next step, it gets moved outside where it's more exposed to environmental conditions and can start to harden off and get ready for its hard life on the side of the road. Because if everything just went straight from here to the outside world, it would get sunburned, it would get dried out too quickly, because a plant, it reacts to how it grows in its environment. So we need to give it a nice, tough environment to make it ready to go out in the big world. We are mandated to grow 3 specific species: the Huachuca water umbel, the arrowweed, and the screwbean mesquite, and one of which we have in here.
So one of the mandated plants is the Huachuca water umbel. This plant is endangered, and it's endangered because wetlands and stream edges are disappearing as humans in our area consume more and more water. So this one, even in the greenhouse, is protected by a little bit of shade cloth that helps it have a cooler, lusher environment. We will see some of this plant on our field trip to Mission Gardens, where it's been transplanted into what biologists call a refugium. And that's a habitat outside of their natural habitat that acts as a refuge for plants or animals for which their habitat is disappearing. So it's one thing to grow a plant like this, but ultimately you want to put it somewhere. And if it's hard to find natural environments to put it, sometimes it's put into secure environments, often by an organization that will help keep the species going and happy.
This is another plant that, though not federally listed as endangered, could be very soon. It is one that is definitely under a lot of surveillance. There are only 4 populations in the world, 2 here in Arizona and 2 in Mexico. This is called your Arizona snakeweed or Arizona oringo. Like the Huachuca water umbel, they are both in the Apiaceae, which is the carrot and celery plant family. So if you've ever seen like a carrot or celery flower, this is a little similar. And this also likes to grow in wetlands, right on the edge of wetlands. So as wetlands disappear, so does this plant. This is a fairly tough one for wetlands though, because it really takes the full sun, it likes a lot of heat, and it really enjoys being just a little wet. Not wet all the time, but a little wet. Funny enough, though it's a very tough wetland plant, that also is the part of the wetland that disappears first. So this plant is disappearing very rapidly, but we are starting to revegetate and put it back in some landscapes like Las Cienegas down south of I-10. They're going to put about 100 of these back in the landscape with BLM. So now we are in our hoop house, which is where plants come out of the greenhouse, and then we keep them in here. There is a little bit of shade protection, but it's a much harsher environment. It's a lot drier. They get watered less. They're exposed to the wind and a lot brighter light. So things get to toughen up out here while we still keep a close eye on them to see if we're stressed. You'll notice we have a lot of grasses in here. We have a lot of grasslands in Arizona. If it's a little higher elevation, it gets a little colder, it rains a little more. That desert turns into a grassland, and we do a lot of revegetation projects on large acreages of grassland. So currently we have several thousand grasses of various species. This is false rhodes grass, a very pretty one we have here in Arizona. And these will go out, be put in the ground, and hopefully we couldn't do a whole grassland because that would be thousands and thousands of plants, but they seed very easily, and hopefully they will reseed themselves and then spread themselves in the new area.
Another plant I wanted to introduce you to is this one called Tumamoc globeberry. It's a little vine. It was discovered in the 1900s, literally across the street from Pima Campus West on Tumamoc Hill. It's a member of the squash and cucumber family, and it exists as this perennial vine. So with good rains, it'll start sending up new growth like this, and as it gets hotter and drier or wintry, it will die back. The fruits, which you can see here, this one's not ripe. It'll turn red when it's ripe, but they're kind of giveaways. They look like microscopic or near microscopic watermelons or something. So it kind of is a giveaway. It's a member of the squash family. There have been records of this plant on campus at Pima West. I've looked for them a couple of times, haven't found any, but sometimes you just have to get lucky and be there at the right time of year, because most of the year it's just a little dry twig that is unrecognizable. So now we're out in the yard, out in the open. You can see many of these plants are bigger. They've had a chance to grow up and get a bit more robust than they were in the greenhouses. I notice these are in really big, heavy, awkward-looking pots, and I'm wondering, Andrew, if you can explain to me why they're in a pot like this.
Sure. So this is a 24-inch tall tree pot, and as Barbara mentioned, this is not a civilian pot. These are for contractors who will rent an auger. So it's a giant drill that will actually drill the hole, and they can dig each hole very quickly in just a matter of a minute, and then just go down an entire roadway and dig 100 holes in an hour. And then the plant just slides out of this tube. Usually the pot has to be cut, and it'll slide straight down. And notice the most important thing when you're transplanting a plant is that it has an established root system and a nice deep root system. So this already has a root system that goes over 2 feet down, whereas a 5-gallon pot would only go down in about a foot. So it's much better to put, especially if it's going to be unlimited irrigation, to put a plant like this in where it has a long, deep root that it gives it a head start when it goes out into a landscape.
So these plants, not just these mesquites, but others that are transplanted in, once they're transplanted in, they're not going to get that much attention in terms of additional watering to get established like you might do at home. So they're much more on their own, and that's why this kind of pot is so helpful. This is, of course, a young saguaro. We have a group of them here. The saguaros and many of the cacti are salvage plants. So rather than starting them from seed, they're dug up. In the case of a saguaro that's very slow growing, this saves a lot of time. So this plant might be 30 years old or more. And growing it in the greenhouse would, from seed would take forever. When saguaros are moved, they're at risk of sunburn because they tend to thicken their tissues on the sunward side. So when they're in the ground like this, these are mostly too big to put in pots. They're shrouded with shade cloth so that the more tender side of them, if it happens to be facing the most sun, doesn't get burned. Okay, now we're about to leave Pima Native Plant Nursery and walk into Prickly Park. Now, this is a reconstructed or revegetated site. It was originally a 60-foot deep hole that got filled with rubble from some construction debris from the University of Arizona. So it's not a great place to grow plants. The other thing is, we are almost on top of the Rillito River, so this area is at some risk of flooding. And one thing that well-designed communities do is they leave some open areas that can act as flood control basins. So you might not be able to see it as we walk in, but it's basically a big, shallow bowl that will collect excess water instead of that water, say, getting into your house. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit about the Cactus and Succulent Society.
So Pima Prickly Park is maintained by the Tucson Cactus and Succulent Society. The Cactus and Succulent Society is an international organization. They have chapters all over the world. But here in Tucson, we have the biggest chapter and kind of one of the most prominent chapters in the world, the Tucson Cactus and Succulent. And they actually do almost all the maintenance here at Pima Prickly Park, and they are in charge of a lot of these plants that just get salvaged around town. And when they can't sell those plants out back to the community, they bring them and put them in here. So there's actually quite a collection of rare cacti, cacti you won't see almost anywhere else in the city, out in Pima Prickly Park.
Pima Native Plant Nursery is a nursery, and to protect these plants as they get ready for transplanting, there's usually a dog or two running around in here that keeps rodents from getting too inclined to chew on the plants. And also because these plants get moved out regularly, birds don't nest here and insects don't establish and so on. Once we move into Prickly Park, though, those constraints are gone, and we should see or hear more animals there than we do here. One reason that Pima County focuses so much on planting plants, returning plants to disturbed areas versus animals, is that no habitat, no animal. And once you have plants in place that are healthy and growing, mobile species like insects and birds in particular, but also other vertebrates will show up. So if you plant it, they will show up.
Here we are in the Agave Garden section of Pima Prickly Park, and here is some pretty clear activity of animal happenings. We don't know what made this burrow or what tried to dig it out, but it's obviously a fairly large animal. It looks larger than a bunny. And we see lots of animals in this park. Regularly I see a pack of coyotes go through here. We've seen bobcats, javelinas, and all kinds of things. So We know that there are animals here. We know they're interacting with the landscape. And it's not too hard to come here and find them yourself if you're interested. It's a public park.
So now we're in the middle of the Cholla Garden, or Cholla Forest, here at Prickly Park. This guy with the red fruits is a Christmas cactus. You might be able to hear some birds more or less over my head. Those are Pyroluxia. On the way here, as we walked in, we spotted a rabbit. I'm sure if we give it a little more time, we'll see a bunch of lizards and so on. There were some mourning doves right behind me a moment ago. So we do have animals showing up here. They're typically hard to catch on film. Easier for you to see them if you come here yourself. So Andrew, I'm wondering if you can offer some suggestions for what people might do, including Bio 109 students, if they want to get involved in revegetation projects.
Well, at the Pima County Native Plant Nursery, we have an extensive volunteer program. So if you'd like to come work in Prickly Park or at the nursery and get your hands dirty, or if you want to get a free plant from me, the only way to do it is to come volunteer. I'll give Barbara my email address, and you guys can shoot me an email if you'd like to come volunteer, and we can set that up. And I'd be happy to teach you more about your Sonoran Desert native plants and how revegetation works in the real world.
So I hope you've gotten a good sense of what Pima Native Plant Nursery does and a good idea of what revegetation is and the importance of it really in communities here and elsewhere as climate changes and development occurs. It's really important to focus on good stewardship to help maintain and support wild communities. I'd like to thank Andrew for taking the time he did to explain a lot of things to us and give us a better sense of what he and the other staff at the nursery do. So really appreciate your time, and we're grateful for the information.